extremist groups like ISIS. Bob Schieffer of CBS moderates from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. That will be live on our companion network, C-SPAN 2, again starting at 5:30 Eastern. And now part of yesterday's summit on combating violent extremism with Muslim community leaders, law enforcement officials, and international participants, including the mayor of Paris. This was part of the White House's three-day event examining radicalization and recruiting, as well as state and federal coordination.
My name is Imam Abdisalam Adam of the Islamic Civic Society of America and Dar al-Hijra Mosque. I'm also an English language teacher with St. Paul Public Schools. It's my honor and privilege to greet all the distinguished guests with the greeting of peace. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you all. First, I would like to welcome Imam Sheikh Saad Musa Roble of the World Peace Organization to begin with verses from the Quran.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. لقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه العزيز بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم من أجل ذلك كتبنا على بني إسرائيل أنه من قتل نفسا بغير نفس أو فساد في الأرض فكأنما قتل الناس جميعا ومن أحياها فكأنما أحيا الناس جميعا ولقد جاءتهم رسلنا بالبينات ثم إن كثيرا منهم بعد ذلك في الأرض لمسرفون صدق الله العظيم.
In translation, those verses of the Quran mean, whoever kills a soul unless for a soul or for corruption in the land, it's as if he had slain mankind entirely. And whoever saves one life, it is as if he had saved mankind entirely. Mosques serve as beacon of hope, while imams provide moral compass for the Muslim community in navigating life. As religious leaders, we are conscious of the value of engagement and for creating a platform for facilitating dialogue between the U.S. government and the Muslim community in the United States and in Minnesota. Undoubtedly, a transparent two-way communication leads to better understanding of issues of concern. In partnership with credible community representatives, there is an opportunity to strengthen the capacity of the Minnesota Somali community in a positive way. We emphasize the following: the peace, safety, and security of the United States are of paramount importance to the Muslim American community, and we oppose any form or shape of violent extremism that threatens peaceful coexistence. We believe in the right of all people to live in peace and security. Muslim imams have condemned and continue to denounce anyone who tries to use the religion of Islam to support terrorism. And we want to work with all Minnesotans to stop terror recruitment, while at the same time protecting civil rights and civil liberties.
On behalf of the World Peace Organization, peace, spirit, an umbrella of life. Make peace in yourself in your family, in your friends, in your neighbors, in your state, in your country, and on the wall, because you are brothers and sisters. And God bless you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good morning, Assalamu alaikum, and thank you to the Imams for their kind words and blessings. My name is Abdi Warsame. I'm a Minneapolis City Council member and a Somali American who lives in Minnesota. I would like to describe my community. The Somali American community is a patriotic, vibrant, and hardworking. We've spent the past few months working closely with our law enforcement partners to create our pilot program, which is titled Building Community Resilience. We are here in support of this effort, which we have developed together, partnership between the community and our law enforcement officers. Our U.S. Attorney, Andrew Luger, will provide a brief overview of our program. Thank you.
Our imams begin our community meetings and our dinners with the prayer for peace, and I'm so happy they could do so today. This is a plan that we built with the Somali community in Minnesota. From 2007 to today, our community has struggled with a cycle of recruiting by overseas terrorists. For the past number of months, we have been meeting with the community, with hundreds of community members. The Minnesota Somali community told us what it would take to combat this recruiting. From these meetings, we built our pilot program, which consists of three main components. First, we will increase community engagement by our local law enforcement. Over the years, our police and sheriffs have built relationships of trust. The community wants to increase those efforts. Second, together, we will address the root causes of radicalization in Minnesota. The community described for us these root causes: an identity crisis among Somalis, lack of job opportunities, the need for more mentors, a shortage of effective after-school programs, and a disconnect between many youth and their religious leaders. As you will hear, our pilot program addresses each of these root causes. And third, our partners will develop community-led intervention teams working at the earliest signs of radicalization. Relatives and friends of those who have joined ISIL have told us that they did not know where to turn when they saw a change in a young man or woman, and they were embarrassed sometimes to admit what was happening. The community wants to build early intervention efforts, and our pilot program helps build mechanisms for doing so. With these strategies, we believe our pilot program will help our community break the cycle of recruitment. First, to discuss the problem in the background of community engagement by law enforcement, our law enforcement leaders. First up will be FBI Special Agent in Charge, Rick Thornton.
Thank you. Since 2008, the FBI's led Joint Terrorism Task Force has been investigating the travel of young Minnesota-based Somali Americans to Somalia to join al-Shabaab. Beginning in 2007, more than 25 Somali Americans left Minnesota in order to train and fight on behalf of al-Shabaab. One of these men was 26-year-old Sherwa Ahmed, an American citizen born in Somalia, who on October 29, 2008 became America's first documented suicide bomber after detonating a vehicle-borne IED in northern Somalia. As Senator Klobuchar said, more than 20 young Somalis have been charged in federal court in the District of Minnesota on terrorism-related charges related to the al-Shabaab recruiting. Some of the travelers who remain in Somalia are still actively recruiting Somali Minnesotans. In fact, al-Shabaab has specifically targeted Minnesota Somali community for recruitment, encouraging our youth through videos and social media to either join the fight overseas or to conduct an attack in the United States. In late 2013, the FBI again became aware of young Minnesota-based Somali Americans traveling overseas to join a terrorist organization. Only this time, instead of al-Shabaab, it was ISIL, and instead of Somalia, the destination was Syria. Over the past 15 months, a significant number of Minnesota-based Somali American men and women have traveled, attempted to travel, or made preparations to travel to join ISIL. So far, 4 Minnesota-based Somali Americans have been charged with violating federal law in the District of Minnesota in connection with their travel or attempted travel to join ISIL. The FBI, along with my law enforcement partners, are committed to disrupting this activity through a multi-pronged approach. This includes building strong community partnerships to prevent radicalization, and separately through an aggressive investigation of federal law. As Mr. Lugar said, as part of this pilot program, we want to work with the Somali community to break the cycle of recruitment in Minnesota.
Thank you, Mr. Thornton. St. Paul Police Chief Tom Smith will tell us about the work that he has been doing in St. Paul.
Thank you. The pilot program is built on solid foundation established by local law enforcement and other stakeholders. The St. Paul Police Department has a long history of community policing focused on the East African immigrant population. As far back as 2004, our department has worked with local partners to increase the involvement of immigrant Somali East African citizens working with local government. Somali community leaders have trained over 600 sworn officers in the St. Paul Police Department in the Somali culture and, in some cases, the Somali language. We meet regularly with Somali advisory councils. We participate in community meetings and host large multicultural events, exchanging valuable information and creating trusting relationships with our community. Several of our mentored Somali youth ended up as new hires with the St. Paul Police Department. The community has told us that these efforts are working, and most importantly, my friends, that they want more outreach work. And I'm here to tell you that's exactly what we're doing. A key component of our outreach work is increasing the number of Somali American police officers using our entry-level positions. They're known as community liaison officers and parking enforcement officers. This gives Somali students an opportunity to obtain their law enforcement degree in the state of Minnesota while working and having a salary with the St. Paul Police Department. But most importantly, it gives us an opportunity to mentor and guide with local police officers our Somali youth along that pathway to becoming a full-time police officer. As with many departments, our current budget has precluded us from expanding these type of opportunities. During this pilot program, we are committed to increasing the number of Somali community members working within the St. Paul Police Department. With additional funding, we can increase the number of positions available and further strengthen the bonds of trust that we've already established. I confidently attest to you the success of our efforts and the great future potential this type of work holds. If we had more time this morning, I would tell you many, many success stories. Minnesota's immigrant communities often come from areas where law enforcement is not widely trusted. It is up to us to build that partnership. It is up to us to build that trust so that we may keep all of our members of our community safe. During this pilot program, we will increase our efforts by holding additional youth summits that will bring young Somalis together with law enforcement to increase the foundation of trust, and we're also committed to increase the presence of community members within our department.
Thank you, Chief Smith. Hennepin County is the largest county in Minnesota and is home to the largest Somali population in the state. Sheriff Rich Stanek, please tell us about your work in Hennepin County.
Well, good morning. It's a distinct honor and privilege to be here and to be up here this morning with my law enforcement colleagues. I'm so glad you all had a chance to hear from Imam Roble. And we've been friends for more than 5 years, and any success the Sheriff's Office has had in engaging the Somali diaspora in Hennepin County is due largely to Imam Roble and his guidance and his leadership. At first, traditional methods for building communities of trust weren't working. We had language and we had cultural barriers that required new strategies. Translations were difficult at best. Men didn't want women at meetings. The greatest barrier of all, Somalis were distrustful of law enforcement because in their home country, law enforcement often operates as the arm of an oppressive government. The key to overcoming these barriers was the one-on-one personal relationship between Imam Roble and myself. After many conversations, he agreed to help us, and he lent credibility to our efforts. Others trusted us because he trusted us. He became our sponsor in the community, personally asked members to attend special one-day citizen academies customized for the Somali community. The agenda, it was tailored to fit the interests and the needs of the community, with translators and culturally appropriate meals. And we learned that it's critical not to be seen as playing favorites. We let everyone know that we'd be working with the entire community, the elders, the religious leaders, women, and youth. We followed up with actions that demonstrated our commitment. We hired the first sworn Somali deputy sheriff in Minnesota. We added a Somali community member as a civilian in our community engagement team, Abdi Mohamed. He works every day building relationships between the community and my office. A great example of our new level of engagement, a Somali woman on our community advisory board assisted us in adopting a new policy on religious head coverings, hijabs, in our jail. This new policy is just one way for my office to show the community that we're not only listening, but we're acting. With Imam Robley's guidance, I've learned the most important member of our community engagement team is me. Our community leaders want and deserve to be respected. This isn't a job to delegate to someone else, but a responsibility shared throughout the entire agency, starting at the top. In the coming year, Imam Robley and I will meet with Somali youth throughout Hennepin County, and we're going to host a series of community meetings to assess the progress of this pilot program as we together address the root causes of radicalization. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. Minneapolis Police Chief Janae Harto has been working hard to build relationships in the community. Chief?
Thank you, Andy. It's certainly an honor to be here today. It is essential that our Somali community feel protected by the police and that the community believes it is part of our department. We have worked hard to make our department more representative of the community. We have 5 Somali police officers who have done a tremendous job forging relationships within the Somali community. But we only have 5, and they can't be everywhere, so they've opened doors for the rest of the department. They've introduced other officers to the community, taught us about the culture, and how to build credibility. They're also working with law enforcement nationally and internationally to help build relationships. Recently, Officer Abdi Ali and Sergeant Mohammed Abdullahi traveled to Toronto to train law enforcement there on Somali cultures and the best ways to build trust. Excuse me, I have bronchitis. I believe police officers are community leaders. So when I became chief, I began working with the Police Executive Research Forum and the Bureau of Justice Assistance to build police legitimacy in the Cedar Riverside community, which, as you've heard, has the largest Somali community in the United States. Together, we began working on a procedural justice and police legitimacy initiative. As taught by Dr. Tom Tyler, procedural justice is comprised of 4 core elements. Voice. When police use procedural justice, they provide community members with the opportunity to voice their concern or side. Neutrality. They respond with a neutral position and apply rules fairly and consistently. Respect. They treat each community member with respect and dignity. And trust. They demonstrate they are trustworthy through their actions and words. We are building confidence with the police that the police and the justice system do address persistent crime problems and work to prevent crime. As part of the Minneapolis-St. Paul pilot program, we seek to increase the number of Somali officers in our department, train our force on Somali culture, and continue our procedural justice initiatives. The lessons learned from this initiative will be used to create a national model for police and other justice system partners to build community relationships while at the same time reducing crime. Thank you.
Thank you. Our pilot program takes us from engagement by law enforcement to solutions. Thank you. Thank you. Where a pilot program takes us from law enforcement engagement to solutions to the root causes of radicalization. Next up will be our community and local partners. We're going to start with Hodan Hassan to talk briefly about identity crisis issues in the community. Hodan?
Good morning. My name is Hodan Hassan. I'm a mental health professional and a youth mentor from Minneapolis. As a Muslim American and a Somali native, the issue we're here to talk about today hits home for me. My family has been directly affected by extremism. My nieces were at the Westgate Mall when terrorists attacked the mall in 2013. One of them suffered major injuries, and we're still struggling with accepting this fact. I'm a bit nervous, so excuse me. From a mental health perspective, we have too many young individuals who struggle with identity issues and confusion of not being American enough. There is an internal struggle of what it means to be American as well as what it means to be Somali, especially in the young generation. This is made worse by the general divide of those who immigrated here, like me, and those who were born here. The experience between these generations growing up is deep, and it includes, but not limited to, language and cultural differences. We also have huge gaps in education and employment, which pushes youth to the far end of the table as they feel less important. Last but not least, the fear of law enforcement still remains a concern, even though some of the Minnesota law enforcement have worked hard to bridge this gap. This identity issue and identity crisis is the root cause of radicalization, one of the root causes of radicalization in Minnesota. As part of the pilot program, the plan is to work with mothers, community organizations, school officials, mental health professionals, and religious leaders to address the early warning signs and find the appropriate help for these youth before it's too late. The lead initiative of this pilot project will be community-led, and the emphasis will be in empowering the community to use internal and external resources to help it solve. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Warsame.
Thank you, Andy. My name is Abdi Warsame. I'm the council member representing Ward 6 area of the city of Minneapolis. Let me describe Ward 6 for you. Ward 6 has the highest concentration of immigrants in the city of Minneapolis, as well as the highest concentration of Muslim Americans. It is home to the largest Somali American population in the United States, and it's an area which reflects the changing demographics of our state and our country. Overall, Ward 6 is a low-income, working-class community. I believe a major component addressing the issue or the root cause of radicalization is lack of opportunities and lack of jobs. Jobs are absolutely essential to improving the Somali American community's lives. Increased employment will help people in my community lift themselves out of poverty and give new opportunities to the next generation. Broadening the skill base and building community capacity helps alleviate issues of unemployment, underemployment, and lack of home ownership and poverty. What my community, the Somali American community, needs today is no less than a Marshall Plan tailor-made to the community's employment challenges. This is what we are working on building at City Hall and on this project. Our plan includes extending skill sets, workforce development, and job training with placement programs intended to significantly increase the number of jobs available to the community. As part of the pilot program, we are working together with federal, state, and local governments and local contracting agencies to increase job opportunities for the Somali American community. We are working to open a workforce development at the heart of the Cedar Riverside neighborhood, which, as you've heard, is the center of the Somali American community. We are hosting job fairs for public and private sectors, working with CBP and TSA, and we've just had a job fair that was designed for the Minnesota Somali American community. Many of our youths are interested in working for their government and law enforcement agencies. We also support the hard work that the Minneapolis Police Department is doing with recruitment efforts from our community. I firmly believe that creating more jobs and opening opportunities allows the Somali Americans equal access to the American dream. Thank you.
Courtney Kiernat from the Minneapolis Public Schools will describe a new program that they are working on.
Thank you, Andy. My name's Courtney Kiernat. I'm with the Minneapolis Public Schools, and we are very proud to be part of this pilot project. We're starting a youth worker intervention model for the Somali community, which has been effective in other parts of Minneapolis as well as 3 of our current high schools. We will hire and train experienced youth workers from the community to bridge the gap between youth and the school system. These workers will spend time in the lunchroom and non-classroom settings, building relationships and trust at school that carry into the community. They will provide connections and continuity during school and after school. Well-trained community representatives working in the school system will help spot identity issues and disaffection. Parents need to feel comfortable raising concerns with their children at the school and community level. Our intervention model will bring trained youth workers together with parents and mental health professionals to address identity issues and disaffection at school, root causes of radicalization.
Our final two speakers begin with Mohamed Farah from Kajok.
In 2007, Kajok began with an idea and a vision to build a strong support network for Somali youth in Minnesota. Kajok is a Somali term for stay away. We work to urge Somali youth to stay away from all negative influences, including radicalization, by getting them involved in their community. Our mission is to focus youth toward higher education, civic involvement, and volunteer commitment. Kajok helps Somali youth understand their options and make the right choices by providing outlets through the arts and education. I would like to highlight a few of our programs. Our Invisible Art program is a traditional Somali arts club that also provides education and peer mentoring. We use the arts as a tool of engagement to empower and encourage youth. Our Be at School program is a truancy program focused on increasing school attendance by addressing early warning signs in Somali youth. We will be part of the Minneapolis Public School intervention program that Courtney described, and we will be working towards a similar model in St. Paul. Our Take Off program is an after-school program that includes leadership building and hands-on learning. It also includes 4-H clubs. We also send groups of Somali girls to Yellowstone Park for outdoor experiences tailored to leadership building, college, and preparation. During the coming year, we will expand our program in all of these areas so that we can reach more Somali youth. At Kajok, we are committed very much to working with our community and government partners to break the cycle of recruiting and radicalization. We view this pilot program as a unique opportunity to engage our youth in positive programs, providing more opportunities, more outlets, and more connections for our Somali youth will help break the cycle that drawn too many of our friends and relatives to a life of terror.
Mohammed Jama.
Good morning. My name is Mohammed Jama. I am a 21-year-old and a college student. I am the co-founder of the City Riverside Youth Council. Our council represents hundreds of kids in the City Riverside neighborhood. As the chief mentioned earlier, the City Riverside houses the largest number of Somalis in the state. The kids in my neighborhood have many issues to overcome. These issues include lack of after-school programs. Many of the kids lack a father or male figure in the house. We have trouble with crime. There is a high number of unemployment rate. And because we come from a fragile state, there is often a lot of distrust in government. Many of the things that we talked about today, the root causes are facing the kids in my neighborhood. There's a lot of passion, a lot of pride, and a lot of success. A lot desire to succeed. I want to make sure the kids in my neighborhood have the opportunity to succeed and thrive and stay away from radicalization. So the council is working with the pilot projects on a number of issues. One of the things we have told to the U.S. Attorney Andrew Luger is we need more mentors for our youth. Many of them don't have opportunity or don't know what is available to them outside of the neighborhood. We have many mentors in our community without resources. For example, our coach, he runs a soccer program for low-income youth. We look up to him, but he needs more resources. He has no money to run his soccer club. We need more people like Coach. He's trusted mentor, and this one aspect of the pilot project we're excited working with him on. We also want to hear more from our religious leaders. We are going to host our own summit and to talk about religion and other issues that kids are facing and the advices that will be needed. We want to hold these summits in our neighborhood. We're also going to be part of an intervention team that many people have discussed. Parents in my neighborhood need to know who to turn into and who to get help from. There will be this program will entirely be run by the community for the community. For as long as we have talked about the problems, now is the time to act, and we are proud to be part of this pilot project.
So we're going to finish with a spoken word performance by Abdi Phenomenal, who is from Kajog. And I just want to also say that we're very proud of our partnership with TSA and CBP, who have been engaging heavily with our Somali community, solving problems at the airport one person at a time. Abdi Phenomenal.
Our communities have been deeply affected by extremist ideologies, and the youth, the narrative of the Somali youth, has been left behind. Through this pilot program, we are focusing the attention of counter-extremism to local grassroots initiatives. We want youth to challenge those who think differently and influence those who think the same. This pilot represents an opportunity for my community to change the narrative. We are lifting ourselves up and walking with all of you in peace. This piece here is an example of the lives of the youth in Minnesota. It's called More Than Heroes. We live, we breathe with our wings open, running fast, get caught with our limbs holding. Caught in the sense of our dreams being broken, the youth have no choice but to sell their dreams for a token. And old age is unnoticed, the youth unfocused, and Al-Shabaab is trying to tell you they'll bring change, but only if you hold this. But I'm holding peace in one hand and freedom on the other. Peace in one hand and freedom on the other. And besides, what's the difference between galvanizing the bleak and sanitizing the heat, between utilizing the weak and institutionalizing the free? I said, what's the difference between galvanizing the bleak and sanitizing the heat, between utilizing the weak and institutionalizing the free? It's between not being able to see and what is the door of opportunities if you swallowed your own key. In order to stay sane, you have to confide in truth, because truth is woven in the fabrics of the women and the youth. Thank you.
As you know, the first elected Muslim American in America comes from my hometown. He's my congressman and a good friend, Keith Ellison.
Andy, thanks so much for your work today and the work you've been doing in Minneapolis. Also, much thanks to our community panel, who I'm so proud of, and our local law enforcement members who did an excellent job, and of course, our Imam Roble, and Imam Abdisalam. Adam, thank you for your spiritual leadership and everything that you do. The folks here, yep, that's right. And of course, our senators, we're so incredibly proud. They're so very well engaged. We're here to discuss countering violent extremism. In order to counter the violent extremist, we have to understand what the violent extremist is saying. What is their case? Abdi Phenomenal alluded to it. He said, Al-Shabaab is saying, come get some action, come do something, right? The violent extremist argument is that America is at war with Islam and Muslims. We have got to start with that idea in mind. That is their case, that is argument. All of us in this room know that this is absolutely false. In fact, the United States neither favors nor is against any religious community. In fact, we have the freedom of religion, and any Muslim in the United States can tell you that you can practice Islam more freely here than anywhere in the world, including any Muslim majority country. So when the violent extremist makes the case that America is at war with Islam and Muslims, we have to assert that this is not true, not just in word, but in deed. And when elected public officials who happen to be Muslim can engage and represent their community, that counters the narrative that America is at war with Islam. When mental health professionals are paid and engaging young people to be healthy and strong, that counters the argument that America is at war with Islam. When young people like Mohammed can freely operate and organize in his community, that counters the false narrative that America is at war with Islam. And when Kajug can engage and organize, that counters that narrative as well. Hiring police officers who are Muslim shows that this case that America's at war with Islam is a lie and it's not true. And so the real thing is we've got to engage. And these promises of America, the problem, the reason that we are susceptible to violent extremism is because we have not deepened opportunity in our country enough. Now, it's true that certainly economic deprivation makes people susceptible to being lured and seduced. That's a fact. But it's also true that not only is it economic deprivation, although it is certainly part of it, the other part is social deprivation as well, and legal deprivation as well. So we've got to make sure that our constitutional framework is scrupulously adhered to. We reinforce the false narrative that America's at war with Islam when we appear to violate our own requirements of the Constitution regarding surveillance. When we mix surveillance and outreach, this is a very short-sighted thing to do, and I encourage members of law enforcement to not do it. Outreach is important, surveillance is important, and they should be done separately. And it's also important to bear in mind that when cases are constructed based on offering the defendant the means, motive, and opportunity to do the crime, that doesn't assist things either. It's also important that law enforcement prosecute hate crimes against Muslims. The violent extremist wants to say that, see, they allow people to abuse you. It's important that we at least admit that what happened in Chapel Hill probably was not only about a parking space. As long as we say, oh, it's just parking, and that this defies our sense of logic and common sense, this actually helps to support the false narrative of the violent extremists. They want to make the case that America hates you and is against you. Join us. It's not true, and we have to be very vocal in asserting that it is not true. Now, if I can get this opportunity to speak to you today, I cannot pass it up without mentioning something that is critically important that is happening right now that law enforcement and community must join together to work on, and that is the fact that on February 6th, our financial services system stopped working with Somali money wiring services to send money to Somalia. Why is this important? This is important because in the region, the violent extremist wants to be able to say, see, they won't even let your relatives send you money. They want to be able to say that. And we have got to stop them from saying that. Now, I know that between the law enforcement, the financial, the anti-money laundering, anti-money wiring, terrorist financing folks, and the people who do development, we can figure out a way to safely send money to Somalia. But I am telling you now, this is not a good thing, and it runs counter to the efforts we are engaging in right here, right now. I support anti-money laundering and anti-terrorist financing. I think it's very important, and I have never met a Somali or a Muslim who wants al-Shabaab or al-Qaeda or any of these groups to get a penny. We all want to stop them from getting anything. But at the same time, as we try to stop that bad dollar, we're so good at trying to stop the bad dollar, we're stopping the good dollars. And according to some experts, over $215 million flows from the United States to Somalia in the form of remittances. And if you ask Somali families, and I'm sure everyone on this table can tell you, that these remittances pay for school fees, they pay for medical things, they pay for food, they pay for things like this. And when you know that the al-Shabaab and the other recruiters will offer a young man a gun, a wife, and a few bucks, it becomes clear how critical it is for us to fix this remittance problem. I'm telling you, we have got to do this, and I want to be very clear that I got on a plane and flew 2 hours here last night, and I'm going back today for the sole purpose of telling you and ringing the alarm bell that we must fix this remittance problem. If anything, we have to do no harm. And there are ways to do this. I'm working on them now. but we need to figure it out. And I urge all of you to leave this place thinking, how can we fix the remittance problem? And I ask you to do that, and I urge you to join me in that. Finally, I want to say that it's very critical to bear in mind that that there is no religion has a monopoly on violent extremism. And it's critical to point out at this time that we have religious extremists of all faiths. We are today gathered primarily because of Muslims who are engaging in violent extremism, and I want to be among the first to tell you I have no concern for them. If any Muslim is violating the law and hurting people, prosecute them, arrest them, convict them, jail them if you need to. But at the same time, understand that we don't want to fall into this frame that countering violent extremism is strictly a law enforcement problem, because it's not. As we've talked about, it's a social problem, it's an economic problem. And we also don't want to slip into the mistaken idea that the violent extremism problem is essentially a Muslim problem, because we know just from Chapel Hill the other day, 3 young people, one of them was a dental student helping homeless people get good dental care. He was a Muslim, he was a brand new married young man. His wife and her sister were excellent students, doing well, making important contributions to this country. Razan, Yasur, and Dia, the 3 victims, were living, walking, breathing examples of countering violent extremism until their lives were taken away. Let us not slip into the mistaken idea that terrorism is somehow a Muslim thing. It's not. Muslims are victim of it, and also Muslims helped stop it. I was very pleased to be able to tell the story of Salman Hamdani, who was a Pakistani-American young man who gave his life and died trying to save people in the horrible attack on 9/11 at the World Trade Center. So the best defense to violent extremism is to adhere to our values, to engage community, to include community, so that when a young person who is either could go one way or the other is walking around Minneapolis wondering, what should I do? They're hearing America's at war with Islam, and maybe that's true because I don't have a job and I can't send money to my family. On the other hand, they're going to encounter Kajug, who's going to say, no, brother, we want you. We care about you. And I believe that I'd rather have Kajug recruit that young man than some violent extremist, and I know you agree with me. So let's adhere to our values, let's engage community, let's deepen and strengthen engagement all throughout our society. Let's work together, and let's understand that at the end of the day, our country, we are fortunate to say, has wonderful, excellent, noble values that are time-tested the world over, and that if we adhere to them, respect the faith of all, and include more people, we will have a safer, better community. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ellison. I'd also like to acknowledge that we have Representative Sheila Jackson-Lee in the audience. You've been a tremendous partner. We're glad to see you here. Thank you. I'd like to welcome Mr. William Braniff, the Executive Director of the National Consortium for Study of Terrorism and Responses to Terrorism at the University of Maryland.
Thank you. Well, dang, I was hoping I didn't have to go after the congressman, and especially after Abdi Phenomenal. That's a tough act to follow. Senators, congressmen, congresswomen, distinguished guests, my name is William Braniff. I'm the Executive Director of one of the DHS Centers of Excellence, the START Consortium, led these last 10 years by Dr. Gary Lafree and based at the University of Maryland. We are a multidisciplinary, global network of scholars seeking to advance research and education pertaining to terrorism and counterterrorism. At START, it is our contention that when dealing with highly politicized issues like terrorism and radicalization, objective and empirical data should help to inform policy and practice. I'd like to present some of our DHS and NIJ-funded research during the next 10 or 15 minutes in order to help contextualize the conversations that we're having at this summit, but ideally to help inform CVE policy and practice going forward. Globally, we are experiencing an historically high number of terrorism incidents and fatalities. At START, we've completed coding 9 months of our 2014 data, and we anticipate that over 15,000 terrorist attacks will have occurred last year, a vast increase from the 11,500 attacks of 2013, but which was itself a record-setting year for attacks and fatalities. So on this graph, you see the dramatic rise of total attacks, fatal attacks, and mass casualty attacks producing more than 10 fatalities. This is largely due to drastic increases in terrorist violence in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. These 3 countries suffered 52% of the world's terrorist attacks over the last several years. And to put this in perspective, the other 48% of attacks occurred across 117 different countries. The erstwhile al-Qaeda affiliate turned competitor, ISIL, was the most active group in the first 9 months of 2014, according to our preliminary data, more than doubling their number of attacks from 2013 to 2014, and responsible for 25% of the attacks conducted by al-Qaeda and its associated movement over the last several years. Unfortunately, both terrorism theory and the empirical research conducted by Victor Assaul and Carl Rethemeier, 2 START researchers, suggests that some of the most important predictors of increasing terrorist group lethality over time is the existence of rivalries between terrorist organizations. It's called outbidding. And as al-Qaeda and ISIL are now competing for prominence, they are likely going to do so through greater levels of violence. This competition can have implications if left unchecked, and not just for Iraq and Syria. Just as al-Qaeda veterans have moved from conflict to conflict over the last 27 years, creating many of the hotspots on the map you see before you, we should expect ISIL veterans to follow a similar trajectory. But instead of bringing with them al-Qaeda's attrition strategy, ISIL veterans will bring with them their strategy of sectarian escalation, competing with al-Qaeda and its associated movement, and seeking to destabilize Muslim regimes in a wider sectarian conflict. We should therefore be concerned about foreign fighters, not just because of the possibility that they may return to their home countries with the intent to conduct an attack, but because if history is a guide, they may also exacerbate already high levels of violence in other conflict zones. And with respect to radicalization at home, we should also be concerned about this new pattern of proliferation, because just as anti-Assad sentiment helps spur foreign fighters to Iraq and Syria, every new conflict zone abroad opens up a new set of grievances and new potential mobilization pathways for our citizens. And we do see a rise in our NIJ-funded data set on individual radicalization in the United States over the last 14 years of cases of radicalization. Importantly, we see not just a rise in al-Qaeda-related instances depicted here in yellow, but also consistently elevated levels of far-right extremist radicalization in red. Terrorism polarizes society, whether along religious, political, or ethnic lines. Extremists on one end of the spectrum often provoke extremists on the other end. We see this in newspapers in the United States and in headlines documenting heightened levels of xenophobia in Europe, and of course with respect to sectarianism in the Middle East. Gaining a greater scientific understanding of radicalization is of course essential if one hopes to decrease the number of individuals who ultimately participate in extremist violence, as indicated in this trend line. So with this data set of approximately 1,500 individuals across ideologies, we've tested radicalization theories for 4 different radicalization pathways in clockwise fashion: individual psychological factors or individual level explanations, recruitment as represented here by the Al-Qaeda manual, The Art of Recruiting Mujahideen, social movement theory as represented by the somewhat ubiquitous social media meme, We Are All ISIS, and groupthink, represented here by the image of the 7-7 and the 721 plotters doing some team building in Wales prior to their respective plots. Now, we found that each of these radicalization pathways explains some instances of radicalization in our data set, but none explain all, meaning that CVE efforts have to account for all of the above. As we look into the details within each one of these pathways, we can start to identify patterns of behaviors or characteristics that should serve as red flags for who may engage in violent forms of extremist behavior as opposed to nonviolent forms of extremist criminality. The implication here is that communities and practitioners can prioritize their limited resources on the highest risk cases, or the cases most appropriate for their capabilities. Undersecretary Brothers at DHS Science and Technology has recently funded START to add variables to our radicalization data set specific to the foreign fighter phenomenon. And we've already started to do this with respect to another growing concern in the United States and the West, that of lone actors. Oh, sorry. Next slide, please. Oh, that was correct. My fault. Thank you. In the U.S., we see a drastic rise in the number of lone actors. And this is problematic, of course, as researcher Brent Smith and his American Terrorism Study Project illustrate. Lone actors go about 5 times longer under the radar between when they conduct their first precursor act to the time of their arrest or their successful plot, when compared to those who perpetrate group-based plots. When we compare these lone actors to those who engage in violent extremism as part of a group, we note some statistically significant differences. Lone actors are more likely to have exhibited documented criminal behavior and mental health issues. They're more likely to have radicalized online. And they evidence a more sudden embrace of radical beliefs and behaviors as opposed to more incremental radicalization in group-based actors. There are many pragmatic implications to this kind of work. Here are 2. These characteristics suggest that mental health practitioners must be part of the solution, as we've just heard, within and outside of the criminal justice system, and that friends, families, and educators within communities are best placed to identify sudden changes in a loved one's beliefs or behaviors. Now, this graph on radicalization tells a very different story than the graph of actual terrorism incidents in the United States dating back to 1970 from Aaron Miller and the Global Terrorism Database team. In fact, we experience a very low number of successful terrorist attacks in the United States. To reconcile that last graph on radicalization with this one, we have to recognize that most radicalized individuals do not successfully conduct an attack, and that not all ideologically motivated crimes qualify as an act of terrorism. So to attempt to quantify the threat of violent extremism domestically, the data tells us that we have to look beyond just terrorist attacks, and we have to look just beyond al-Qaeda and its associated movement. So let me cite you some numbers from START's extremist crime database, led by Josh Freilich and Steve Shermack. Between 1990 and 2013, there were 155 ideologically motivated homicides committed by individuals adhering to far-right ideologies, killing 368 individuals. Between 1995 and 2010, there were 239 arson and bombing attacks conducted by the eco-terrorist groups ALF and ELF, 90% of which targeted businesses and private homes. Between 1980 and 2013, there were also 196 failed and foiled plots associated with al-Qaeda and its associated movement. Thanks to our law enforcement communities and to our communities, these were foiled. 10% of these plots were foiled due to tips from the community that led to FBI investigations. Now, this statistic is promising, but START research suggests that communities offer more to CVE than just serving as the eyes and ears of law enforcement. So let me highlight one project by START researcher Steve Wine, who led a DHS Science and Technology funded research project in Minneapolis and St. Paul that I think forms an empirical foundation upon which the Minneapolis pilot program that you just heard about has been built. Instead of treating the Somali community in the immediate aftermath of the 20-plus individuals who left to go fight with al-Shabaab, instead of treating the Somali community as a threat, Steve gave them the microphone, and he asked them both what makes them vulnerable in their minds, but also what makes them resilient to the threat of violent extremism. The community identified 37 risk factors that they felt increased their vulnerability, which Steve aggregated into 3 categories: unaccountable times and spaces, perceived social legitimacy of violence, and contact with recruiters and associates of extremist groups. But the community also identified 49 strengths that Steve bucketed as family and youth capacities, community capacities, and government policies and programs. This means that even the Somali community in Minneapolis at a time where they were widely regarded as the least well integrated and the most highly stigmatized communities in the United States, that they voiced their primary role in CVE as family members and community members, and that they saw a supporting and collaborative role for government. It also reinforces our radicalization research, suggesting that CVE must be comprehensive, dealing with not just the individual factors, but also helping communities push back on extremist ideologies, and that it must include more than just community engagement, but also prevention programming and intervention work. This is just one project. Let me provide a few other quick examples from our research why CVE should be embraced. First, it's actually not because of the numbers that I cited earlier. Instead, it's because terrorism tears at the fabric of society. Terrorist organizations live by the mantra, polarize, radicalize, and mobilize. And in this country, terrorist groups target the very wedge issues that can unravel us: race, religion, trust in government and the rule of law, our historical identity as an immigrant nation based on ideals and not an inherited ethno-linguistic identity. If terrorist groups seek to polarize society, CVE can be understood as an effort to fill the breach, to bolster the center, and prevent that devastating polarization from taking place. Second, it's pragmatic. The law enforcement and intelligence communities can't manage the signal-to-noise ratio associated with this issue. As START researcher Clark McCauley points out, using survey data, those individuals who espouse radical beliefs outnumber those individuals who actually engage in extremist behavior by several orders of magnitude. And we do not understand the connection between radical beliefs and radical behaviors well enough to allocate our law enforcement resources effectively. But communities are much better placed to filter the signal from the noise and to engage in the pre-criminal space where radical ideas are debated. 3, CVE best practices address all hazards. If we're worried about gangs, drugs, child predators, or radicalization, most CVE programming should help mitigate the threat of all these ills. 4, because we're not just talking about the threat of al-Qaeda-related terrorism. CVE protects every American from all the forms of violent extremism present in the United States. And to give you one example that may seem counterintuitive, START surveyed law enforcement professionals on the front lines recently about the greatest threats to American society. And the law enforcement community ranked the sovereign citizen movement first, followed by al-Qaeda and its associated movement, and then the militia movements. So we understand that violent extremism crosses ideological boundaries here. And 5, finally, because our data suggests that Americans think it'll work. In 4 nationally representative surveys, we found that approximately 57% of Americans are willing to meet with local law enforcement and with DHS personnel to discuss these issues. Furthermore, those respondents that had a higher degree of confidence in the government's counterterrorism efforts were actually more willing to attend these meetings and more willing to report suspicious activity should they see it. This suggests that we can kickstart a virtuous cycle if we build trust and engagement at the community level. More anecdotally, 2 years ago, a START intern named Mustafa walked into my office and said, "Sir, al-Qaeda doesn't speak for me. I want to start a Muslim pop music label. I want to bring on Muslim bands. And I want to promote the kind of Islam that I believe and I practice." And from Mustafa's idea, we created an undergraduate course, which I think is the first in the country, called Innovation in CVE, where we teach our students an innovation methodology called design thinking, and we empower them to create their own locally tailored CVE programs, really inspired by the kinds of programs you heard about earlier from Kajug and from Mohammed Jamaa. Americans are going to change the dialogue. You're going to see that from more and more of our youth. We have challenges, though, that we have to anticipate. One example drawing from the research of Jared Brafman, Aryeh Kruglansky, and Gina Ligon. 10 years ago, violent jihadist ideologues were venerated and emulated in online discussion forums. 5 years ago, figures like Anwar al-Awlaki struck a much more emotional tone, encouraging do-it-yourself violence and do-it-yourself propaganda production. But today, individual fighters in Iraq and Syria chronicle their exploits in real time to their own fan bases in the West. And in this new paradigm, ISIL tells us that the scholars are no longer the ones to be venerated. It is the men and women of action who are to be emulated. So after finding my own personal role model through Facebook or Instagram, I can progress to one-on-one secure conversations through SureSpot or Kik. Once I arrive in Syria, ISIL may ask that I download their own application called Fajr al-Bashar, or Dawn of Good Tidings, which allows ISIL's administrators access to my social media accounts. By doing so, ISIL can circumvent attempts by network controllers to shut down their official propaganda organs by sending propaganda through my own personal account. The implication here is that the line between First Amendment freedoms of expression, engaging with extremist ideas online, and material support for a designated terrorist organization, providing a group like ISIL a new and different platform to disseminate their propaganda, are likely going to blur as smartphones and social media platforms continue to evolve towards an extension of our behaviors and not just our thoughts. We have to be prepared to deal with the legal implications of this and the social implications of this, and so there's a lot of work for us to do. It's my belief that research can help us understand the dynamic nature of the threat environment but it can also help us to develop evidence-based approaches to counter violent extremism, which I argue we don't yet have, evidence-based approaches, so that we can understand what works, what doesn't work, and how we can keep our American community safe from all forms of violent extremism. Thank you.
Thank you. So before we move on, if you have an empty seat next to you, raise your hand and we are going to make you a new friend. Go ahead. If you see a raised hand, please fill in the seats. We have a couple of spots available. We want to make sure people can sit if they need to. I also have the unenviable task of making sure we keep the trains running on time for two important reasons. One, so that you can get lunch, and two, so that we can make sure the President of the United States has time to address this group. So I'm going to welcome our next panel from Los Angeles and ask that they are very focused in their presentation and that we all take advantage of the lunch to ask them follow-up questions. Thanks.
Go ahead. Go. Good morning. My name is Ali Jagvani. I'm the chairman of the Young Muslim American Leader Advisory Council in Los Angeles, in the city of Los Angeles, California, in partnership with the Los Angeles Sheriff Department. On behalf of the Los Angeles delegation and also the young Muslim community in Southern California, I'd like to extend intensive gratitude to the administration and to those who worked to put this summit together. As a 23-year-old young American Muslim, I see the importance in engaging with our law enforcement partners. The Los Angeles framework emphasizes on engagement, trust, collaboration, and partnership with these agencies. This establishment of these features has made this a model of success. I take great pride in introducing Stephanie Yonekura, the U.S. Attorney of the Central District of California, who has accomplished great efforts in the Muslim community. Please help me welcome Ms. Stephanie Yonekura.
It is a great pleasure to be with you here this morning to introduce the Los Angeles program. In a few moments, you will see a film that we created to outline our approach, which is built on three prongs: prevention, intervention, and interdiction. The video will introduce you to some of the many community members that are part of our collaborative effort that unifies government officials, community-based organizations, and faith-based groups. We utilize this collaborative effort to strengthen the communities and prevent extremist ideology. See, I'm still cold because I'm from LA. Extremist elements from taking root. As the United States Attorney for Los Angeles, I see the Justice Department as playing a crucial and critical role in balancing the civil rights of individuals with the overarching need of protecting the nation and its citizens from terrorist threats. That balance is of particular importance to me. I am the daughter of a Japanese American who was forcibly removed to internment camp during World War II. My father and his family were stripped of all property and all liberty simply because they were of Japanese descent. As a result of this, I am keenly aware of the need to build relationships and trust, to break down the barriers of fear and prejudice that take root at worst because of ignorance and at best because of lack of knowledge. I want to take a moment to thank Ken Arledge, gosh, I am just stumbling, Arledge, the filmmaker who has been working hard with the Los Angeles team to bring Los Angeles here to you so that you can see the solid foundation of the Los Angeles framework. It is a foundation years in the making, built on open dialogue, relationships, and trust. Ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy our film.
The population of Los Angeles, which I think is the most diverse, and when I say the most diverse, it means that it is the most mature city in America, in the world.
Violent extremism has definitely impacted our lives. It has become a danger for all of us as Americans when we have to deal with groups like ISIL, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram.
Extremism is not power, it is weakness. It is not robust, it is disease.
Well, we started a few years ago by getting to know our community. I mean, that's the foundation, is getting to know who we are reaching out to. The whole idea is to build the foundation of trust that could lead to talking about future events and other partnership initiatives.
Really, in essence, everyone needs to come together, as we have in the past in dealing with other issues, to confront this threat.
The three areas of our focus have been prevention, intervention, and interdiction. The intervention is an area where we need work. This is an area, if you look at the gang model of Los Angeles, the war on gangs didn't work. It didn't work arresting our way. We couldn't arrest our way out of the problem. You cannot declare a war on this type of a phenomena. And so it wasn't until we realized that intervention efforts, where you talked about youth development, employment opportunities, character development, diversion programs. This is an area that is just ripe for this phenomena that we're experiencing today. To find ways to build off-ramps for people who may have it in their mind that this is what they want to do, but they haven't yet mobilized to violence.
Off-ramps is essentially an alternate path for the individuals to go down. It's the community, it's the mental health resources. It's the mentors in the community and getting them engaged with some of, in particular, oftentimes the youth, to assure that they have someone to talk to and they have someone that can try and steer them away from going down that wrong path.
In the Los Angeles County mental health system, we've found that if we're really interested in creating strong recovery, we need to do more than provide treatment. We need to find community support for all aspects of a person's life.
What we're trying to renew and what we're trying to restore is our, beautiful behavior and ethics and principles that benefit the community.
So the more engaged we are and the more involved we are with different activities and different groups besides just law enforcement, like interfaith and community awareness and activism, this channels a lot of comprehension and open doors between all of these teams so that there's better efforts made to combat these problems.
I think that interfaith relations are important because we often hear only about the extremes of each community, right? Whether it's Jewish or Muslim or Christian communities. And by virtue of shifting the focus back on those who are willing to build relationships with each other and work through the difficult moments of conflict, we create a space for that majority in the middle, for those moderates, to be louder and to overpower those voices on the extreme.
The role of every faith leader is to guide their flock away from violence and into peace, and specifically what their faith teaches about peace and how to deal with situations when two people do not agree.
We can't keep arguing to young people that an American Muslim identity is real unless we facilitate opportunities for them to actually experience this thing that's called a Muslim American identity that differentiates their experience from Muslims around the world, Muslims in history, and Muslims in the future.
We felt that there must be some synergy between the law enforcement and the Muslim community. And we took some initiatives, but the response was great. And we started in different modalities, having regular meetings with the Sheriff Department and with the LAPD.
In the social science arena, we say, as Los Angeles goes, so goes California, and as California goes, so goes the nation.
The leadership from the very top have made the initiative to reach out to the Muslim community, to get to know us,
and to involve us in the process of securing our communities.
When the LAPD implemented the suspicious activity reporting process, there was huge public outcry.
And it was only through engagement with community groups and civil rights organizations, along with law enforcement, that we were able to turn a corner.
When Chief Downing presented the SAR program to us, we met with him along with other civil rights groups and said we need 5 changes in the program. He took those requests, went to LAPD, came back, and we were able to reform SARS so that not only is it adhering to the civil liberties standards of our country, but it became more effective.
As long as we're talking to each other, things will happen. We can change the narratives.
The role of the U.S. Attorney's Office in the community engagement process is really one of support for our local partners, being the LAPD, the LA County Sheriffs, and the LA Human Rights Commission, who for years have been on the ground establishing relationships with the community based on trust and communication.
When we talk to each other, when we act together, we break down the barriers that separate us. We find common purpose, common campaigns, and in the end, we find our common humanity.
After the shooting in Wisconsin in the Sikh Gurdwara, where 6 Sikhs were murdered by a white supremacist, we didn't have to go to LAPD to say, can you please help watch the Gurdwaras? Can you please help keep an eye on members of our community and keep an ear out in case there's any copycats or repercussions from that? They came to us. They called us. They called several members of the Sikh community, me in particular, to make sure that we were doing okay. Now, this type of policing creates an image and creates a concept and creates an ideal in the communities they serve that you are working together with the police department, that they are concerned about your welfare. And this is something that the whole country could learn from LAPD.
If we take Los Angeles as the model, which it is, I'd like to see it spilling out Los Angeles as fast as we can.
So this is our mission. We're in this particular part of town. Our objective is to revive, renew, restore everything that's good, including mercy, compassion. We want to revive peace.
Hello, everyone. My name is Haroon Azar. I'm the Regional Director for Strategic Engagement for the Department of Homeland Security in Los Angeles. Quick note on the video. This is a very difficult short version that we have. We have, I think, 25 to 30 hours of footage with many other members of the LA community, both law enforcement, community, academics. And so we will have that available as well. But this is I believe an 8-minute version, but there is a longer version that covers a little bit more in detail what the Los Angeles model covers. So my office, the Office for Strategic Engagement in Los Angeles, was established in 2011, and it was an effort by the Department of Homeland Security to partner with a locale, in this case the City of Los Angeles, to work with them, work with local stakeholders to strengthen the department's relationship at a local level with faith-based organizations, with many of the folks you see here in the pictures and in the video, in an effort to work together, come around the table to mitigate threats to our homeland security. We're going to get right into a short panel. Of course, the video gave us a good foundation to build on, but there are a few questions that I will be addressing to the panelists, and I'm going to go through lengthy introductions. Sorry, we've been given a very hard stop. So I'm going to just start with the questions and give a quick introduction while I'm doing it. So first off, the first question will be for Sergeant Mike Abdeen at the Los Angeles Sheriff Department. We often hear that Los Angeles has been doing CVE much before the federal government really made it a priority. Can you please expand on what that means for LA? What have you guys been doing for so long?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everybody, and it's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor also. I thank the staff of the White House for inviting us here. Yes, that's correct. We have been using CVE, or as I like to call it, PVE, for many years in Los Angeles, especially within the Sheriff's Department jurisdiction. The label we put on it is not as important, in my opinion, as the work we have done. We strongly believe in community trust policing, and this is what we've been doing for many years. But as it pertains to CVE, about 8 years ago, the LA County Sheriff's Department established an outreach program to the diverse communities that we serve, and in particular to the Muslim community in Los Angeles County, and all of that with the purpose of trust building and strengthening the relationship between the community and law enforcement. Trust is the foundation of any program. So by engaging our communities and developing programs that benefits both the community and law enforcement, we have created a true partnership that's based on respect to each other's position and the role in the prevention of any possible extremism or extremist ideas in our communities. We believe that education and positive awareness is the key to achieve that. We have taken the approach of prevention through education. We believe strongly in preventing violent extremism by education and positive awareness. We all have a role and a responsibility at the same time to educate ourselves as law enforcement officers as well as the communities that we serve about the threats that we are facing within our community and globally in the world. And by creating our Muslim Community Affairs Unit at the Sheriff's Department, we were able to structure and develop a specific program with the Muslim community, such as developing a cultural diversity training program for our deputies, where we all have to go through a couple of hours of training at the academy now to understand the cultures and the diversity of the communities that we serve. We have also developed training programs for the Muslim community and the communities we serve in several aspects, not only talking about extremism. We have developed a young leadership program. We call it the Young Malak because we strongly believe in developing our youth and building new leadership within the community that we all could work with in the next 10, 15, 20 years down the road. We have also increased the hiring from the diverse communities that we serve. We have now officers and deputies that serve from different ethnic backgrounds. We also coordinate our efforts among law enforcement, and we work very closely with our local, state, and federal partners. We work closely with the LAPD, LA City Office of Human Relations, the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office, because we believe coordination is very important. So when we address the communities, our message is consistent. But it is very important for all of us to understand that no CVE program would work without the proper outreach to the community. We have to communicate and talk and build a relationship before we start discussing CVE and go into deeper issues. It's the foundation of any program. Before we get to talk anywhere, but this is what we've been doing the last few years.
Thank you. Thank you, Sergeant Abdeen. Next, I'd like to introduce Ms. Anila Ali, who wears many hats, educator, also president of the American Muslim Women's Council. Anila, you've lived both in the United Kingdom for a good amount of time and the United States. And as an educator, in coming from that perspective, what gives you hope today and what gives you cause for concern?
Well,
First of all, we have to remember that the American, thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you to the White House and thank you to my partners here. I think the diaspora in the United States, the Muslims in America are very different to the Muslims in the UK. They resisted integration, whereas Muslim community here in the United States is very well integrated. And also we need to remember that 50%, almost 50% of the Muslims in the United States have college degrees, and that matters in a world where 1.5 billion Muslims are there and 800 of them are illiterate. It really matters. So we have a different community here. Also in the 60s and 70s, when the immigrants came to the UK, they didn't have the kind of inclusion programs that we have today, especially in the educational sector. There was no inclusion, so kids were bullied, they were name-called, girls like me were beaten up just because we looked different, and that's the kind of atmosphere I grew up in. However, in the United States, we're really way ahead of the curve. We already have anti-bullying programs, we have excellent multicultural programs, and we have that, and that gives me a lot of hope, because imagine standing, I'm a Muslim and I stand with my Jewish colleagues and I stand with a Holocaust survivor and we talk about how we're different yet we're so alike. That message really resonates with young people. So I have hope that if we can build empathy and compassion into our curriculum, which already exists, we have great programs at school level, but if we can train the teachers and we can give them tools to use, I think that's where we're going to have a lot of success. At our local level, at the Pakistani, South Asian, Muslim community in Los Angeles, we've done amazing things with law enforcement. We see them as our partners, and before this CVE even started, right after 9/11, we've been working on efforts to empower women, because we see women as our partners, and Chief Downing and I got together with a whole lot of Muslim women, and we empowered them to form this American Muslim Women's Empowerment Council, and we engaged them in civic duty. We engage them in a mainstream American giving back to the community, service to the community. We teach them through the FBI civil rights, and that's so important in a world where we're seen as we don't have equal rights in our religion. We actually do. Muslim women have equal rights. And teaching them all of that has empowered them, has actually engaged them and given them a forum where they actually have a place to voice their opinions. And then also given them an important way to counter the narrative. So 2.5 million Muslims in the United States, if we can all send out messages, counter narratives, and we can flood the waves, we will muffle the negative narratives.
Thank you, Anila. Next up, we have Deputy Chief for Counterterrorism for the Los Angeles Police Department, Michael Downing. Chief Downing, your unit does a lot of engagement work, both with the Muslim and non-Muslim communities. Can you talk a little bit about what has cultivated the healthy relationship your unit has? And also, I'm going to ask the other question. We always get this question, how do we separate community engagement versus intelligence? If you could please address that in your remarks.
Sure, thank you. Good morning, everyone. So our approach and our philosophy that we begin with is that our Constitution is our greatest shield, and our people, all of our people, are our greatest strength. So the way we look at it, I love Bill Braniff's idea about CVE, how it affects so many more things than what we're really here to talk about today. And we recognize that community policing is community policing, not policing communities. So community goes first. So in the interfaith community, that's our real strength. We have the Jewish community, the Christian community, the Coptic community, the Sikh community, the Buddhist communities. And so our outreach and engagement deals with all of those communities. Now, I would say there is a little bit of heavier focus on the Muslim communities, only because for so many years we didn't really recognize that Muslim communities existed in this form. And so since 2008, we really have come to learn more about the cultures and the traditions. And I think the other aspect is how Islam expresses itself in Los Angeles is different than how it expresses itself in Minneapolis and New York and Washington, D.C. And we have to understand our communities, and they are communities, not community, and then be able to respond to that. So in terms of our outreach to the interfaith, When we get Jewish leaders and Muslim leaders and Christian leaders and Sikh leaders together, we talk about the commonalities of what we have and how to create that sense of justice, that sense of peace, how to bring access to government, how to raise the voice, and also this idea of integration as opposed to assimilation. You know, we don't want assimilation. We want the culture, the tradition, the faith, the language, the family structure, and to appreciate those diversities is our real strength. And I think that's been our success because the officers that open the doors for us to do this come from those communities. We always say that we try to recruit and reflect the communities that we serve as a law enforcement agency. And so we have those officers. We have the Coptic Christian. We have the Israeli-born Jew. We have the Muslim convert. We have the Iranian Farsi-speaking female Muslim. And they understand because they came from those regions. So they can open the doors and allow us opportunities to come in to build trust, to build bridges, to teach problem solving. And it's really not about national security in this wheelhouse. It's about how do we improve the quality of your life? How do we make it so that your kids can go to school and learn and develop to their potential so they can play sports, so they can play basketball, so they can go to iftar dinners, so they can celebrate Ramadan, so they can appreciate the high holy days of the Jewish communities. And I think that's the real strength of our program is that when we have this appreciation for what others have, there's strengths in all of these faiths and all of these communities, and we really open it up for people to feel free to go to these festivals and different ideas. And then I think when law enforcement can kind of step back a bit, so it is not a securitized relationship and encourage civic engagement, this is when communities take hold and there's real traction in terms of creating this environment which can resist crime, which can resist recruiters, which can resist gangs recruiting and criminality. And just as Bill Braniff said it's an all hazards thing. This is not just about countering violent extremism. It's about countering crime, countering violence, countering violent extremism, and creating an environment where these things are harder to take root.
Thank you, Chief Downing. Salam Mirahmadi is the president of the Muslim Public Affairs Council. Salam, the Muslim Public Affairs Council has been one of the organizations on the forefront of community-led solutions to countering violent extremism. Can you please speak a little bit about why that should be a priority for you as an American Muslim organization?
Yes, thank you very much for inviting us to participate on this panel. Violent extremism is a threat for Muslims both internally and externally. Internally, there is a struggle within the Muslim world about what Islam is and its role with the rest of society. And there is a cult of death that is being propagated by groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIL, and there are governments that have an ideology of compulsion. And we Muslims in Muslim communities now have the responsibility to set the record straight in that Islam is a theology of life. Islam is for freedom. If we don't have freedom and justice in our religion, then we can't call it religion. That is God's will. So that is the internal threat that we are dealing with. The external threat is that people are using Islam to kill civilian life, to destroy, to impose, to violate the rights of women, to kill Christians and Jews. And so, as American Muslims, we have an opportunity. In the Quran it says, "Inna ma'al usri yusra, inna ma'al usri yusra," with every crisis comes opportunity, with every crisis comes opportunity. Repeating it, saying, look for the opportunities to come with solutions. And so, when we go to LA Sheriff's Department, LAPD, the FBI, DHS, it is our responsibility to engage, to come up with solutions to these problems. You can complain about it, you can litigate, you can protest, but at the end of the day, you got to come to the table to come up with solutions. And that's why dealing with this issue is important. Perception is reality, and the American public is afraid right now. There is hysteria. Even though we as American Muslims are not responsible for the acts of violence in the name of our religion, We have to take responsibility in leadership. Now, Mike was talking about a securitized relationship. Yes, that's a problem. The only way to deal with that is twofold. Number one, convert profiling programs to partnership programs. And number two, deal with redress so that you come with deliverables to the community. The community has many issues. And so we need to work for civil liberties while we're working for security. Let me just end by saying that America provides us with a great opportunity. Abraham Lincoln, in the Lincoln Memorial, when you go there and read the second inaugural address, he talks about the Civil War as something that is imposed on him. I think we feel the same way today. This is not our doing, but this war is imposed on us. And rather than complaining about it or dismissing it, it's about engaging and taking leadership and coming up with solutions so that you can reframe and restore what religion is all about. It's about love for God, love for country, and love for humanity.
Thank you, Salam. And I'm getting all the signals that we're out of time, but
that's why I had to get that in.
I'm gonna turn it over, and our federal colleague Dave Bowdich, Assistant Director in charge of the FBI Los Angeles, will put a nice bow on it. Dave, your question is, we get a lot of questions about what FBI's role should be in CVE. I think it's important to be covered, and please address that as we put the bow on this. Thank you.
Okay, I'll be very quick. So first of all, the working group that put this thing together, that put the framework together, was very thoughtful in their processes, and there was much discussion as to should the FBI be a part of this framework? Should the enforcement aspect be a part of this, or is it just a, yeah, we know that's there? We believe it is, for many reasons. But part of them, part of those reasons we've seen in the mental health field especially. So the process before was a little clunky, where we would identify someone that we would begin to look at, and we realize this person has severe mental health issues, and we need to intervene with this person. And we were having to go department by department because the federal system was not well constructed to deal with a person like that. Now we have a much more seamless approach between step 2, intervention, and step 3, interdiction. And sometimes it'll go from 2 to 3. Other times it will begin where we will begin an investigation. We'll recognize we need to get the mental health resources involved to really decriminalize the person, but make sure that we're intervening with this person because they could be a vehicle towards danger if they happen to meet up with the right group. So that's why it's so important, that seamless transition. And I'm going to stop because I know we're out of time.
I'm going to seamlessly transition to our next panel. How about that? Thank you so much. I'd like to invite Dr. Hedieh Mirahmadi as our moderator for this next panel. Dr. Mirahmadi is the president of the World Organization for Resource Development and Education, a community-based approach to countering radicalization, a partnership for America, right here in our backyard, Montgomery County, Maryland. Come on up, introduce the panel.
Wait, as my panel gets seated, I'll just say a couple words. I wanted to thank the amazing staff of the National Security Council for giving me the honor to moderate this panel today. It's for those of you that have been involved in this process, it's been a long time coming, but it's an amazing opportunity to be with you all here today. As Amy mentioned, in one of the suburbs of DC Metro, WORD has pioneered our Montgomery County model. It's a community-led partnership to counter violent extremism with our county police department. Our chief is here, Chief Thomas Manger, and our county executive's office. And we are committed, all of our partners, faith leaders, school counselors, police, social workers, to promoting social cohesion and public safety. We have to have that as our premise in order to create the trust necessary to deal with the hard issues like violent extremism. By educating our diverse stakeholders, we create an early warning system that generates an understanding about the risk factors of radicalization, but creates a mechanism whereby we can intervene. And we have a formalized intervention program, and we have a rigorous system of assessments to make sure that we are having progress towards decreasing the risk factors of our clients. We've enjoyed sharing our program design and the best practices with the pilot cities, as well as other cities across the United States and Western Europe, and look forward to working together to further our common goals. We are delighted to have with us this very distinguished group of government officials, experts and practitioners who will share with us their experience and best practices in building intervention and prevention programs here in the United States, in France, in Belgium, and even Morocco. Our first guest today will be the Mayor of Paris, the Honorable Mrs. Hidalgo. Elected in April 2014, Mrs. Hidalgo is the first female mayor of Paris. Our second guest will be the Honorable Mayor Hans Bonte. He's a Belgian politician and a member of the Flemish Socialist Party. Third, we will have Dr. Ahmed Abbadi, who currently serves as the Secretary General of Rabita Mohammedia Ulama, the Mohammedan League of Scholars of Morocco. He has previously served in many official positions with the government of Morocco, including the Director of Islamic Affairs. Last but not least, we have Mr. Oren Siegel, who is the Director of the Anti-Defamation League Center on Extremism and the Director of its Research Center. He trains law enforcement officers, works closely with the tech industry, and publishes reports and articles on a wide range of extremist topics. So I will start with a question for Mayor Hidalgo. First of all, please accept all of our condolences for the loss and the suffering of the French people since the horrible terrorist attack last month. How has that tragedy changed the way the city of Paris will deal with violent extremism? Please.
Thank you. First, I would like to tell you thank you. Thank you for this invitation. Thank you for your support after the terrorist attack in Paris. When we are together, we are more strong. Now I speak in French. I'm sorry, but I think it's better for me and it's better for you. Au cours de ces 3 terribles journées que nous avons eues au mois de janvier, 17 personnes ont été assassinées à Paris parce qu'ils étaient journalistes, parce qu'ils étaient policiers, parce qu'ils étaient juifs.
During those 3 horrible days that we experienced in January, 17 people were assassinated because they were journalists in Paris, because they worked in a magazine, because they were police officers, and because they were Jewish.
Ces actes violents illustrent une violence de type communautaire au sein de notre société, et malheureusement, les chiffres sont là. En France, les actes antisémites ont été multipliés par 2 en 2013, et les actes musulmans contre les musulmans ont été augmentés de 10% aussi dans cette même année.
These violent acts illustrate the current rise of community-based violences within our society. And unfortunately, the figures speak for themselves. In 2013, anti-Semitic acts have been multiplied by 2 between 2013 and 2014, and likewise, anti-Muslim acts have increased by an order of 10%.
Je me pose, en tant que responsable politique, une question. Qu'avons-nous fait pour éviter cela? Que n'avons-nous pas fait pour que cela arrive?
So, as a political leader, I ask myself, what did we do to avoid that? What did we not do to prevent that?
Cette question, je me la pose, mais je la pose aussi à l'ensemble de la société parisienne.
And this is a question that I ask myself, but this is the same question that I'm asking to the entire society of the city of Paris.
À l'évidence, les attaques de janvier ne visaient pas seulement Paris ou les Parisiens.
Evidently, these attacks in January did not target exclusively Paris or the Parisians.
Nous l'avons vu aussi encore récemment à Copenhague.
And this is something that we witnessed just quite recently in Copenhagen.
Ces attaques visent les fondations de nos démocraties.
And in fact, these attacks are attacking the foundations of our democracies.
Nous avons des différences entre les États-Unis et l'Europe, mais je crois que nous nous retrouvons sur l'essentiel.
There are differences between the United States and Europe, but I do believe that we are united around the basics, the fundamentals.
Nous partageons un même idéal, né pour nous de la philosophie des Lumières, mais qui s'est traduit aussi dans la déclaration d'indépendance des États-Unis.
We share a same ideal, which stems on our part from the century of the Enlightenment, but also translates itself in the Declaration of Independence of the United States.
Pourtant, si nous sommes là tous aujourd'hui, c'est que sans doute nous avons la conviction qu'il ne suffit plus d'affirmer les valeurs de liberté ou d'égalité.
But if we are here today, is that we understand the fact that it is not just enough to assert the values of freedom and equality.
Face aux tentations et aux expressions les plus violentes, nous devons opposer un projet de société à part entière, une fraternité.
And facing these temptations and their most of self-enclosure and self-locking up in ourselves, we must propose a full-fledged project for society based on fraternity.
Je suis moi-même issu de l'immigration.
I myself am a child of immigration.
Je suis né en Espagne. Mes parents ouvriers ont immigré en France.
I was born in Spain. My parents were working class and they immigrated to France.
J'ai bénéficié du modèle d'intégration républicaine.
And I benefited from the French model of Republican integration into the Republic.
Qui m'a permis de faire des études.
And that allowed me to study.
Et d'être devant vous aujourd'hui en tant que maire de Paris.
And to stand today before you as the mayor of Paris.
De cette histoire, je tire une conviction.
And from my own personal history, I draw one conviction.
Pour s'inscrire dans des valeurs communes, dans les valeurs communes de la République française, il faut que chacun puisse être fier de ses origines.
To participate, to join in the joint common values of the French Republic, one must also be proud of one's own origins.
Que chacun soit respecté.
Everybody has to be respected.
Dans cette origine.
Within their origins.
Les réponses que nous apportons aujourd'hui à Paris, elles sont d'abord bien sûr sur la question de la sécurité des Parisiens.
And of course, now the responses that we are providing in Paris focus obviously above all on the security of the citizens of Paris.
Suite aux attentats, les lieux de culte de toutes les religions, bien sûr religion juive, mais aussi musulmane, catholique, sont protégés.
After the attacks, places of worship are being protected. Of course, Jewish places of worship are protected, but also Catholic and Muslim places of worship are also benefiting from extra protection.
Les écoles sont aussi protégées.
Schools are also protected.
Nous avons un renfort de 2000 policiers, de 6000 militaires supplémentaires aujourd'hui à Paris.
And now 2,000 extra policemen and 6,000 military personnel are present in Paris.
Les services de renseignement aussi sont à l'œuvre pour lutter contre la radicalisation.
Our intelligence services are also working to fight against radicalization.
Par exemple, une plateforme de prévention de la radicalisation religieuse, une cellule de prévention qui traite des signalements est mise en place avec un numéro vert.
For example, we have established a system of prevention of religious radicalization. We have established a prevention cell which takes care of all notifications, and alongside with all these systems, we have established a toll-free hotline.
Des associations sont mandatées pour prendre contact avec les familles, avec l'école, pour traiter ces phénomènes de radicalisation.
Non-profit groups, associations have been requested to get in touch with the families and to deal with the schools to prevent this phenomenon of radicalization.
Nous facilitons des mesures alternatives à la prison, par exemple, lorsqu'il y a des actes antisémites ou des propos antisémites, il existe des programmes qui se déroulent notamment avec le mémorial de la Shoah.
For example, we are proposing alternative measures when anti-Semitic acts or anti-Semitic statements are being proffered. For example, we have established a program, an alternative program, in conjunction with the Holocaust Museum.
La deuxième réponse, c'est qu'il faut promouvoir une ville plus inclusive.
And the second response is that we must, from now on, promote a more inclusive city.
Et là, je me suis inspirée des modèles de certaines villes américaines, je pense notamment à New York, qui me permettent de renouveler le modèle français d'intégration républicaine.
And in this case, I inspired myself specifically from some examples that were used in some American cities, for example, New York, and this for the purpose of renewing the French model of integration.
Quelles que soient ses convictions, sa religion, son origine, chaque Parisien doit pouvoir trouver la voie de la réussite et de son épanouissement.
Regardless of one's beliefs or conviction, regardless of one's religion or one's origin, everybody in Paris must find a way to success and to integration and fulfillment.
Aujourd'hui même est signé à Paris un pacte pour réduire la pauvreté dans la rue.
Today in Paris, we are signing a pact in order to reduce drastically poverty in the streets.
À Paris, notre ambition prend l'exact contre-pied des no-go zones totalement fantasmées par certains.
Ainsi, and in Paris, ambition goes the exact direct opposition of these so-called no-go zones that have been completely fantasized by some people.
Nous investissons depuis plus de 10 ans dans les quartiers populaires.
And in fact, we've been investing for over 10 years in the working class neighborhoods.
En ouvrant des écoles, des centres de santé, des logements, des centres sociaux.
We've been opening schools, healthcare centers, social services, adding housing units.
Nous avons renforcé aussi le partenariat avec les prisons parisiennes pour travailler sur la sortie de prison d'un certain nombre de jeunes.
And we've also increased our partnership with the Paris prison system in order to increase the monitoring, the follow-through of young people upon release from jail.
Mais j'ai voulu aussi renouer les fils du dialogue avec l'ensemble des communautés religieuses et des mouvements laïques.
But I also wanted to renew dialogue between all of the religious communities and all of these secular associations.
Le 12 mars prochain, je réunirai l'ensemble de ces représentants pour travailler sur des propositions concrètes.
On March the 12th, I will convene all of these leaders at City Hall in order to work together towards concrete proposals.
Notre priorité doit bien sûr être la jeunesse.
And we must focus, of course, first and foremost, on the youth.
Nous devons aider les jeunes à pouvoir trouver leur chemin à partir de l'école.
We must help young people find their own way, their own path in life as they leave school.
Car derrière chaque parcours de radicalisation, il y a un échec à l'école.
Because behind each pathway towards radicalization, prior to that, there's always, at some point in time, some school failure.
J'ai proposé, à la suite des attentats, d'ouvrir toutes les écoles tous les samedis matins à Paris.
That is why, following the text, I proposed that all schools in Paris be opened on Saturday mornings.
Pour accompagner les enfants dans la réussite scolaire.
And to help children succeed in school.
Je tire aussi de l'expérience américaine la nécessité d'avoir un engagement citoyen très volontaire.
And from the American experience, I also see how important it is to have very strong citizen volunteership, citizen engagement.
À l'image du community service aux États-Unis.
Akin to a community service in the United States.
Mes chers amis, je sais que Paris a une responsabilité particulière.
Dear friends, I do know that Paris bears a very specific responsibility.
Un grand auteur français, Sacha Guitry, disait
very famous French playwright, Sacha Guitry, once said,
être parisien, ce n'est pas être né à Paris, c'est y renaître.
To be a Parisian, it's not to have been born in Paris, it's to have been reborn in Paris.
Beaucoup de personnes sont venues naître une deuxième fois à Paris.
And many people have come to Paris to be born a second time.
Paris est une ville d'opportunités.
Paris is a city of opportunities.
C'est une ville progressiste et humaniste.
It's a progressive and humanistic city.
J'ai conscience de notre responsabilité particulière dans ce fléau qui touche l'ensemble de nos démocraties. Je vous remercie.
I'm fully aware of our very specific responsibility in facing this scourge that affects all of our democracies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mayor Bonte, it is reported that a higher proportion of people from Belgium have traveled to Syria and Iraq to fight than from any other country in Europe, a quite alarming statistic. What do you think is at the root of that phenomenon, if you can explain that a bit for us? And what kind of programs have you instituted at the local level to address this problem?
Good morning, everyone. Let me begin by thanking you for the invitation. I will try to formulate an answer to the difficult questions you posed me, and I will do it in three parts. I will tell you about my town and its problems with Syria fighters. Then I will be happy to share with you our definition of radicalization and our approach to the problem. And finally, I will try to offer some conclusions or considerations which I feel are relevant also for other cities. Two words about Vilvoorde. Vilvoorde is a very nice but small town near Brussels, at the heart of Belgium, at the heart of Europe, in a very prosperous region, but we just only count 42,000 inhabitants. But due to the Brussels spreading, we form one whole sociologically view scene with the capital. From Vilvoorde you can get to the center of Brussels in 10 minutes. It takes 1 hour to get to the beautiful city of Paris, and it takes 1 hour and a half to get to London, 1 hour and a half to get to Amsterdam. So we are really at the heart of Europe, and from there off you get everywhere, anywhere in the world. And that explains something when we talk about Syrian fighters. So it's estimated that my country, Belgium, saw 380 fighters leaving for Iraq and Syria. 380 on a population of 10 million inhabitants. 101 have returned in the meantime. Of 50, we are as good as sure that they have been killed over there. And from Vilvoorde as mayor, it's a hard thing to say, but 28 people of my city, mostly young people, mostly boys, but some girls, some minors also, have gone to Iraq and Syria. We are sure of that 5 of them are killed already, and 8 have returned. 2 are now in prison, but we have another 40 young people, including a number of underaged girls who are preparing to leave or who are marked as potential leavers. And it's important to note that nobody has left for Syria or Iraq since summer 2014. So it's knock on wood to keep that way. So it became these huge numbers made of my city a little bit laboratory for CVE. Due to the limited size of our town, and due to the fact that I myself, but even more my Moroccan alderman for integration, personally knows nearly every family confronted with radicalism and with a boy or a girl who is leaving. So it makes that we have a good oversight, that we have a good overview of the problem. We have seen young people leave from virtually every secondary school in my city, or from every neighborhood. And the first ones has left the city at the end of 2012, usually on the run from justice and on the run for prison, because the first people leaving Vilvoorde were actually people who had a lot of confrontation with police, but never got to jail. And now they are on the head of the foreign militias of ISIS, now IS. They are seen in awful video movies. They are seen in awful pictures And they were successful in recruiting other young people from my city and from the region and from Belgium. They were very well organized to recruit by internet, to recruit by Facebook. And so that's the reason why a lot of young people from Belgium followed the first group, which were, as we can say, the very hardcore militants of IS. But as I told you, the last few months we have needed to be vigilant to ensure that underage young people, 14 to 16 years old, and quite a few girls in the mid-puberty, do not get drawn away from our democratic society. So it made us a little bit a laboratory, I said. And as we've seen it, and as we have heard the stories of their mothers, of their sisters, of the brothers, of the girlfriends, of those who's left behind, we see that the radicalization process is a process of indoctrination together with the process of isolation. And the first component is indoctrination. As I told you, the person concerned will be consistently bombarded with a particularly radical message, so she has the idea forced upon him that he has a special part to play in history, that he has a special part to play in bringing about the caliphate. And he must become a real hero in the history of creation of the Islamic State. That's the message that they always constantly are receiving. And the second component of the radicalization process is isolation. Isolation usually starts with the instruction to convert to Islam, because most of the young people who have left the country had a problematic history with their families, with the mosque. It was a constant arguing between fathers and sons what it was to be a good Muslim in Europe, in my country. They didn't frequently visit the mosque. And so it started mostly, that isolation process, with the instruction to convert to Islam. But soon the demand follows that all ties be broken with Christians, with moderate Muslims, with friends, with family. And so they are trying to get them to the point where people feel that they have been chosen to take part in the armed fight in Syria and Iraq. And so both processes, indoctrination and isolation, are taking place in a context in which the conflict in Syria and Iraq that has gone on for years is covered permanently by the mass media. So also there is a kind of a pull factor, because they are feeling a little bit, or they are feeling the international community as a coward community, not reacting firmly enough against the brutality of the war over there. So this process of indoctrination and isolation is much more successful among people with a weak position in society or who are struggling with their identity. As I told you, youngsters of the second and third generation, minors also. And it's striking that recruitment by isolation and indoctrination works best among people carrying with them a lot of frustrations from the past, and who mainly see few or even no chances anymore of achieving anything in society they grew up. And when you ask me, Mrs. what is the reaction of it, well, we try to turn it around. We try to reform the information process. We try to form the isolation process by a process as rebuilding social networks around the youngsters. We are trying to mobilize the civil society. We are going to schools. We are trying to motivate schools, teachers, sports clubs, our mosques to work together with the welfare instance of my city, with the public authorities to rebuild, restore the social network around the young people, so that they can feel that they are belonging to our society, that they get a future in our society, that they get opportunities. And especially for young men, it's always the same. You have to give them new opportunities, at another time, new opportunities. So we have to restore, we have to motivate civil society to work together to restore that social network. And the second thing is that instead of letting them be bombarded by messages and indoctrination processes, we do have to inform them. We do have to inform them what it is to be a real Muslim in Western society, what it is to be Muslim in Vilvoorde. So, therefore, we need the help of people knowing the Quran and knowing the real religion. And so, these two things are we bringing together around partner tables, the social networks, the people who are important in the lives of the youngsters, together with people who are very acquainted with the real Islamic values. And so that brings me to 3 short conclusions. The first conclusion is we are facing a global problem, but we have to act locally. We have to see that we can't win the war against radicalism and extreme violent behavior of a minority only by bombing in Syria and Iraq. We also have to combat in our cities, in the neighborhoods, especially in these vulnerable neighborhoods. We have to make a fist to break down those who try to radicalize other people, those who try to recruit. But and that brings me to the second thing, we all have to do that on all political levels. We all have to do it, and we have to stop a kind of ostrich policy I see everywhere. I see everywhere a kind of ostrich policy. There are countries in Europe who say they don't have a problem, but they won't maybe not see a problem. I see cities also in my country which maybe are facing problems also of radicalism, but who don't dare to talk about it, who don't dare to ask to their civil society to get aware. And so that brings me to the third thing, the third brief consideration I make, and I promise to talk about icebergs, because radicalism grows where integration fails, and radicalism grows where there are a lot of frustrations. And the people I talk about are do have a history of a lot of frustrations. And it's like an iceberg. We only see the top, but it's much huger under the waterline. And so we have to work on this frustration, and that is social policy, that is labor market policy, that is education policy. So we have to work on these huge amount of frustration under the waterline. And as anyone knows, you can only melt an iceberg with warmth. And that is what our youth need. They need more warmth. Thank you very much.
Dr. Abbadi, you do some very important work bolstering traditional scholars and institutions in the Rabita movement. Can you describe for us how some of those programs work and how you believe that helps in countering recruitment and radicalization? Thank you.
Thank you, Hedieh. Hi, everybody. It's such an honor to be here today to tackle this quite intricate issue. What is going on the field today is just an emanation of what is dwelling in a type of magma and frustrations in minds, in psyches, in the internet fibers, and elsewhere. So what we are witnessing on the field is just the tip of the iceberg. 9 on 10, 90% are in the psyches and are in the brains, are in the nets, are in the societies. Now we are witnessing a mutation in the extremist discourse. It is not just a puritan discourse, it is offering a dream of dignity and dream of unity. Dream of unity because the Muslim world witnessed a crash in 1924 of the Ottoman Khilafat, and many countries in the Muslim world felt like if they were orphans. Yes, Morocco was not in this frame because it has its own khilafat, but the majority of the countries felt orphanage because decisions were taken in Istanbul and now everybody was on his own. So people felt orphanage and they were looking for a father. It's a sort of panacea, cure-all pill that everybody was seeking out after. So in Morocco, we were aware of the fact that this is a dream that is being offered, and we need to shape a political Islamic theory that would respond to that. And this, if you can follow up, if you trace history, you would see that this is what happened in many countries. And in Morocco, it was the case, but in 1979 in Iran, after the Iranian Revolution, there was this status of Murshid, which is Amir al-Mu'mineen, which is what Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi in Daesh and Abu Bakr Shikau in Boko Haram are claiming. It is not a game. They are doing it for a political purpose because there is a set of laws that cannot be displayed unless from this position of Amir al-Mu'mineen. But the legitimacy is the question. So I'm saying all this to say that this discourse needs to be deconstructed. And this is what we've been trying to do in Morocco. We have been through the literature, the extremist literature, audio, written, audiovisual, on the internet, and we have discovered some repetitive items, such as that, well, the West has been conspiring to scatter the Muslim world, whereas it is uniting. The West has planted Israel in the Muslim world, so we need to do something about that. They would say that those governors, kings and presidents are not doing what needs to be done, so we need to do it ourselves. They would highlight the fact that there has been colonialism, and in colonialism millions were killed, and this needs to be addressed. They are not doing something about that. We need to do what we can do about this. 4, they will talk about humiliation. 5, they will talk about double standard. 6, they will talk about the fact that there is this cocktail, Iraqian, Afghani, Burmese, Central African cocktail. 7, they will talk about the infiltration in matter of values and in matter of ideology. And 8, last but not least, they will talk about the value system that is being challenged, and we need to do something about this. And for all that, the Daesh people would come and use the vacuum that was created because of the fact that during the 60s, 70s, and 80s in the area, religion was not addressed and tackled as it should have been tackled. We have armies of officials, religious officials in the Muslim world. Take the example of Egypt, you would have 280,000 officials in the payroll. They're being paid by the public money. In Saudi Arabia, you have 300,000 people. In Morocco, you would have 70,000. In Algeria, something like that. In Tunisia, you have 35,000. Those people need to be re-looked. We need to build up capacity. Those people need to be re-iconized, icons and empowerment. This would require some curricula address and some work to reshape those people and enable them to do this, because they are already on the payroll and this is what they've been trained for. So in Morocco, we've been doing this. We have twice a month training for over 50,000 people. And we're offering some curricula that would make them aware of those challenges. Then we have been going through the sections after deconstructing the discourse and seeing the fact that it is offering this dream of unity and dignity. Put yourselves in the shoes, in the skin of an 18-year or 20 years old guy, jobless, angry, frustrated, and reading on the net that, come to me, I'll marry you to the most pious and beautiful lady in the world. Come to me and I'll make you the head of intelligence in Daesh. Come to me and I'll make of you a scholar. We need to offer alternative dreams. And this work in the dreams arena is very capital, very crucial. And here comes the role of the various layers of action, arts and social structures and academia, universities and research centers, and so on. So this fact that those traditional institutions need to be re-empowered is something that we have been working on. Sections of perception. When we're talking to youth, we need them to be the ones who are doing for themselves. They do not need adults' faces on those actions. They need those actions to be theirs. This is why we have launched Peers Education Program. For kids and pupil youngsters, we have launched cartoons, and we're trying to work on video games. This is not very easy, because those video games need to be appealing. They need to be as colorful, as joyful as the Prince of Persia or as those wonderful video games. And last but not least, we need to be aware of the fact that there has been a vacuum in the structures. The structures, like the Sufi order structures, like the extended family structures, this is a vacuum because extremism offers structures. And in Morocco, we've been working on this. Just to wrap up, we need to be aware of the fact that what is being offered is in the arena of content. And we need to work in the contact. We need to mobilize our universities and our research centers to shape an integrative, collaborative strategy to work throughout all those dimensions to tackle the issue. And this is what we've been trying to do in Morocco so far. Thank you.
Sorry, our panel's been cut short, so we're running a tight ship here. Thank you, Dr. Abbadi. Oren, at the Anti-Defamation League and the Center on Extremism, you study all kinds of violent extremism, especially as it relates to anti-Semitism. Can you talk about the resources that you've created to empower communities? Thanks.
Okay, so I have about 140 characters or less. So let me just say, in the Jewish community, the concept of violent extremism is not abstract. It's very real. And so at ADL, domestically but also internationally, when we're trying to mitigate this threat of violent extremism, we don't have the luxury, frankly, to focus on one extremist movement over another. And so, this discussion today and in the coming days and for a while, it's really imperative for us, based on our research, based on the trends that we're seeing, and frankly, based on the threat not just to the Jewish community, but to the entire American community, that we look not just at one community. Violent extremism is not a Muslim community problem, it's an American problem. It's also a problem that's international. And so when we're looking to figure out ways to mitigate that threat, we have to find partners to help us do that. And so at ADL, we found multiple different partners. I still believe that effective countermeasures, counter-narratives, and just effective ways to counter violent extremism is through work with law enforcement. That's important. We heard about it on the panels today. An informed law enforcement entity, agencies, the more that they know not just about the communities, but about the actual threats. That's where ADL steps in because of our research. And so if we take, for example, the threat of white supremacists and right-wing extremists, and look at the amount of murders in this country in the past, say, 10 years, 95% of murders against Americans, and that includes law enforcement, have been caused at the hands of right-wing extremists. We have to remember that fact when we're coming up with strategies. But that doesn't mean that we can deal with these various different movements at the same time. While we have to recognize the diversity of the threats, we also have to recognize that each threat requires a unique set of remedies and strategies to combat them. So dealing with a sovereign citizen movement, which is likely going to get in a confrontation with a law enforcement officer because they don't recognize authority, is a very different approach than when dealing with American citizens who are motivated by radical interpretations of Islam. We can't have the same remedies, so we have to treat them separately. It's important to have a space to deal with ISIS and al-Qaeda, to discuss that. It's also important to have a space to deal with white supremacists. And of course, we can learn about what their commonalities are. I mean, obviously, they all hate Jews, for one. But in other ways, there's also a commonality. But we also have to make sure that when we're looking at these specific threats, that we're really identifying them for what they are. So when we look at American citizens who have tried to join ISIS and al-Qaeda over the past, say, 3 years, what have we noticed? These are people of diverse backgrounds, diverse religions, diverse races. Yeah, diverse religions as well. Perhaps they're responding to the call of, radical violent extremism that is motivated by a radical interpretation of Islam. But these people are not Muslims themselves in many cases. We have to understand that a Christian who converted to Islam just 2 days ago believes they are part of ISIS and al-Qaeda. Does that make them part of the Muslim community? So the resources that we put in to creating positive relationships with the Muslim community is very important. But we cannot forget all those who are not within the Muslim community that are responding to these threats as well. Profiling, in a sense, does not work. So the more we're educated about the actual people that are getting radicalized, the better we're going to be in terms of finding these remedies. I'm going to conclude on this because I know we're short on time. In addition to law enforcement, we found a very willing partner in terms of the technology industry as a whole. I've read a lot of criticism. Why don't we just have Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, et cetera, just remove all this stuff so that people won't have access to it and they won't get radicalized. Besides the fact that that's completely impractical and that we also have freedom of speech in this country, the reality is that these companies are doing something about it. They're at different levels. We have worked with them. They've endorsed ADL's best practices, which basically reminds people, their users, the people who are trying to exploit their services as well, that not only is there a legacy of technical innovation that have been created by these various technology companies, but these companies take seriously the fact that people are trying to exploit them. And so they are trying to also come up with creative solutions to mitigate those who want to exploit them. They are responsive. They're part of the community coming up with strategies. That's been a critical partner for ADL as well. And finally, I have to say, at the end of the day, what's the most effective way to sort of walk somebody off that ledge? You can share information with law enforcement. You can share a strategy with the tech industry. But when you have your own peers who are willing to not only identify a problem, but have the courage to step up, that's part of this counter-narrative as well. So our educational programs where we go into schools to try to train them not to be innocent bystanders, that they have a voice, starting at the age of 8 and 9. If you see something, you can say something as well. It's not just a law enforcement mantra. You see somebody getting bullied. You see somebody being treated or stereotyped in a negative way. Well, even at that age, we're training them that you can do something about it. Because that value of not being a bystander, of having a voice, using positive speech to combat negative speech, that's what we're talking about in this arena of countering violent extremism. So we have to start young and then take it from there. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ari. And please join me in thanking the rest of our panelists for their comments today. And please use the opportunity at lunchtime to hear more about their programs. Thank you.
And in about 10 minutes, here on C-SPAN, live coverage from the State Department in Washington, D.C. of closing remarks at the White House conference.